Okay, so before I begin, I need to acknowledge my collaborators and colleagues on the project. Austin Homkis, who's a field biologist with the project, Dr. Steve Windles, who's a wildlife biologist at Voyageurs National Park, and then Dr. Joe Bump, who is a professor at the University of Minnesota. It won't let me use my pointer arrows. Okay, anyways, and then I also need to thank a bunch of wildlife technicians. Every year we have about 7 to 8 generally postgraduate students who are coming to help get experience on our project and also to help do the field work. As you're going to see, our work is extremely field intensive and we need a lot of people's help. And so what I'm going to present today wouldn't be possible without the help of all of these people. So a little bit of background about the project. It's a collaboration between the University of Minnesota and Voyageurs National Park. In 2012, once wolves were removed from the endangered species list, Voyageurs National Park started to do some basic wolf research. They wanted to understand some different things such as how many wolves were in and around the park, how many packs were there, how many wolves are in each pack, what were the wolves that were dying from, how many wolves were actually surviving, how many were dying, all sorts of things like this. Then in 2015, which is when I started my master's work, that's really when we started doing really intensive wolf research during the summer, and that's really what sort of blossomed into what I'm going to talk about today. So our current objective on the project is to understand the reproductive ecology and the predation behavior of wolves during the summer in the Greater Voyageurs Ecosystem. And I should note, we use the term summer to really refer to the ice-free season. And we do that because during the ice-free season, beavers are available to wolves, and beavers are an important food source for wolves. So we kind of make this dichotomous distinction here between summer and winter. But anyways, during the summertime, wolves are doing two main things. They are raising their pups, or they're having pups and raising pups, and then they're hunting and killing prey to feed themselves and to feed their pups. So if we want to have a really comprehensive, detailed understanding of wolves during the summertime, we have to have detailed information on both of these facets of wolf ecology. So if you're not familiar with where the Greater Voyageurs Ecosystem is, it's up in the northern part of Minnesota. I've here just shown Voyageurs National Park. You'll see in this next photo or map that Voyageurs National Park is just a portion of the Greater Voyageurs Ecosystem. And we actually do a lot of work outside of Voyageurs National Park. And the reason why we study wolves in this larger area is because the national park has this very odd shape. And so there's very few wolf packs that exist solely within the park. When we started doing our work, our goal is to really understand wolves in Voyageurs National Park, but we realized that wasn't going to be possible without understanding wolves south of the park, because very few packs exist entirely within the boundaries of the park for the whole year. As you can see here, there's about 2 packs that remain entirely within the park, and then the rest of the packs sort of border the park or spend a lot of time outside of the park. And wolves really do not care about the national park boundary, and so things that are going on outside of the park, such as hunting and logging and human activities and things like that, are going to undoubtedly impact wolves inside of the park as well. So to understand wolves in the national park, we have to understand what's going on outside of the national park. And because we do so much work south of the park, we end up doing field work on public lands, state-owned land, national forest land, and then also a lot of work with local landowners, including ranchers and hunting groups and just private residents and things like this. So in total, we work with 108 different landowners who've granted us permission to do work on their property, and that comprises about 13,400 acres. And so we've really gotten a lot of large support from the local community, which has been kind of surprising and also very rewarding because wolves are often a divisive issue. But we have only asked 110 landowners for permission, and 108 of them have said yes. And so we think that's really a sign of the kind of support we have in the area. So one thing that makes Voyageurs National Park and the Greater Voyageurs Ecosystem so unique is the sheer abundance of beavers. And so in this map here, each one of these pins is an active beaver colony that we identified during our aerial surveys last year. And so in total, there's 1,100 colonies in this map, and that's a lot of beavers. In fact, some parts of Voyageurs National Park have the highest beaver densities in the lower 48 states, and those densities probably rival even the highest densities throughout most of Canada. So there's a lot of beavers, meaning there's a lot of food for wolves. To give you a perspective of what this really looks like from the air, this is a photo I took a couple years ago during one of our beaver surveys. And you can see there's sort of beaver-created wetlands interspersed all throughout the landscape. And then in this instance, each one of these white arrows pointed to an active beaver colony. So if you're a wolf and you can figure out how to catch beavers, that's a really great food source on the landscape. So before I dig into the predation behavior work that we do, which is really where I'm going to focus most of my time, I did want to briefly talk about this work that we're doing on the reproductive ecology side of things. And really, all reproductive ecology is anything to do with wolf pups and raising wolf pups. So we want to know a lot of, I would say, basic information about wolf reproduction, such as where are wolves having their dens, how many pups are being born, how many of those pups might be surviving. Wolves often move their pups from multiple dens and then eventually to rendezvous sites, which act as above ground dens. And so we want to know where they're keeping their pups, where they're moving them, why are they moving them? And then we also want to understand, what they're feeding their pups with and things like this. And I mentioned we really want to understand pup survival, number of pups that have survived. And that seems like it would be a pretty simple thing to do, but it's actually quite challenging. And it's really not been done in very many places and not done very well in most instances because it's just such a challenging thing. So we're trying to get at how to study wolf pup survival. And the way that we're doing it currently is by going into wolf dens in the spring and I should note we find dens from GPS collared individuals, which I'll talk about in a bit. But we find dens and we go in and we count the number of pups that we see in the den. So here's a video from last year that I took where I walked in on a den of a pack, and there are 4 pups that are in here just taking a nap in this beaver lodge. And this was actually the den. The pond had drained and left this beaver lodge sort of high and dry, and it made a perfect den. And so the pack had their 4 pups. So we go into dens in the springtime, and we want to get an idea of how many pups were born into that pack. Then the big goal is to try to figure out how many of those pups actually survive until they're 1 year old or until the following winter. And not only how many survive, but sort of how is that occurring, at what months are most pups dying, when are we seeing a lot of mortality, when are we not seeing mortality, and things like this. So to get at that, we've spread over 100 remote cameras across different pack territories in the hopes that we get wolves moving around with their pups starting in late summer and then into the fall and into the winter. So in a sense, we can get an account for the number of pups in the spring, and then we can start to see how many pups are still alive as the year progresses. And so if everything goes well with our cameras, we get video footage that turns out like this, which is really just turns out beautifully, and we get to see the number of pups. So here we have an adult. This is likely the female. You can see in the background there's a pup. Here's another pup now. This is in late July, so the pups are much bigger. This pup will stop and eat a few little blueberries there, and then we see a third pup shows up in the background. And this is really what we're hoping to get. So that's really a lot of the work that we're doing with pup survival, and I kind of went through it in a real split second here. But that's our main goal, and that's the main goal of using remote cameras. We also put remote cameras out at wolf dens once we've gone and counted the pups so that we can observe the pup behavior and also some of the pups interacting with the parents as well. And sometimes we get some really great footage that doesn't have a whole lot of maybe scientific value, but is just really endearing to watch, like this really cool video. So yeah, so we get, I'm not going to show the whole thing. If you want to watch more of these, you can check out our social media, which I'll talk about at the end. But we get these really neat videos of wolves and wolf pups doing things that we would never get to observe otherwise because of the dense forested area around Voyageurs. So like I said, I'm going to spend most of my time discussing the predation behavior work we're doing during the summer, because that's really where our work is really unique and different. And really it's where we're doing things that other people are not doing or haven't been able to do quite yet. So during the winter time, we all know that wolves primarily travel around as a cohesive unit and as a pack. And this is when a lot of science has occurred on wolves, or when a lot of research on their predation behavior has happened, because it's relatively easy to study wolves. I'm going to use that term relatively, but it's relatively easy to study wolves during the winter time because you can put a GPS collar on, or even just a radio collar on a wolf in a pack, and then you can find that wolf from the air, and you can be in an airplane and you can actually observe that wolf and its other pack mates interacting with one another, traveling around, killing prey, feeding on prey, all sorts of great information. So a lot of the foundational work that's been done on wolves has occurred during the winter time. And the other thing too about the winter that's helpful is that when wolves make a kill, it's really obvious. There's blood in the snow, there's a big disturbance that you can see, bones, hair, all sorts of things like that. Part of the reason those kills are so obvious is that during the winter, wolves are primarily preying on large prey, such as adult deer and adult moose. However, in the spring, once pups are born, everything changes with the way the pack interacts and moves together. So once the pups are born, the pack stops traveling as a cohesive unit, and instead individual wolves within the pack start going and getting food by themselves. And so they leave the den, get food, and they come back to the den. And they do this over and over again. So if we were to look at a GPS collared wolf, this is what we would see. This is the track of one wolf during a couple of weeks. And it's pretty obvious where the den is, because the wolf leaves the den, makes a big trip, comes back to that same spot, and does this over and over and over again. And during the spring, summer, and fall, when wolves are doing this, they're primarily hunting and killing small prey, which in our area are beavers and deer fawns. Yet our understanding of wolf predation on small prey is really quite poor due to two main reasons. The first is that the forest during the summer in northern Minnesota is incredibly thick, and so you just cannot really observe wolves hunting and killing their prey. You might get one very fortunate opportunistic observation, but you cannot observe wolves doing this enough to learn a lot. So you really need GPS tracking technology to understand where wolves are going and try to figure out where they're killing their prey from their GPS locations. And that's where the second sort of challenge comes in. Even with GPS tracking technology, finding where wolves killed the small prey during the summertime is extremely challenging, because wolves can almost entirely consume and kill a beaver or a deer fawn in a short period of time, and they leave virtually nothing left to find later. So if you can't actually observe wolves hunting and killing their prey, and you can't find through field work where they're actually making these kills, it makes it really challenging to understand what's actually going on. So because studying wolf predation on small prey has been so challenging, there's a lot of really basic aspects of summer wolf ecology that we just don't understand. For example, there are no estimates in the scientific literature about the number of deer fawns and beavers a typical wolf kills during the summer. And so this really is frankly quite surprising, because there have been literally hundreds of thousands of hours of wolf research in Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ontario, Quebec. And yet we don't have information on a really sort of fundamental basic question about wolf ecology. And because we don't know the answer to that, we have no idea what really affects how many fawns or beavers a typical wolf kills. What really dictates why wolves might kill this many beavers and some other wolves might kill this many beavers. And because we don't know that, we really don't understand what effect wolf predation is having on prey populations during the summer. it's very challenging to know what impact wolves are actually having on the beaver population if you don't even know how many beavers they're killing in the first place. So these are the kinds of questions that we sort of set out to answer, and many more as well, but these are sort of the basic questions that sort of piqued our interest in trying to figure out what are wolves doing during the summer. So there has been a lot of work on wolves and other predators that has suggested if you really want to understand their sort of cryptic hunting behavior, you have to use GPS tracking technology and try to figure out where they're actually making kills. Now, like I said, when we started, we knew that it was going to be challenging to find kills because many people had talked about how difficult it was to actually locate where wolves were killing their prey because they wouldn't leave a lot behind. But we are pretty convinced that wolves couldn't kill a beaver or a deer fawn without leaving some evidence. It might be pretty hard to find, but they have to leave some sign that they actually made a kill there. And fortunately, we were right about that. So to get at wolf predation behavior, we collar wolves with GPS collars that take locations every 20 minutes from April until October. So we get 72 locations from each wolf each day. And this gives us a lot of great data about where they're moving around. The way that we then find kills is by searching clusters of GPS locations. So here is a week's worth of GPS locations on a website. So I should note that the collars upload all the locations to a website, which you can then access via the locations and also download them. So the collar uploads locations to a website. We go on it, we look at them, and we download them. We then run these locations, so this week's worth of locations, through a computer program. And what that computer program does is it identifies everywhere that this collared wolf had remained relatively stationary for more than 20 minutes. So that's what this map indicates. So if I go back between this one and this one, you can see basically the general areas where there's a lot of clustering of locations are sort of pulled out now. So each one of these spots is considered a cluster of GPS locations, and we search them because the idea is that anywhere wolves spend more than 20 minutes could be a potential kill site. And so we've got to go into those sites on the ground and try to figure out and look for evidence of a kill, or that a kill occurred, and if a kill didn't occur, what else was the wolf doing? So when we started searching these kills, we really weren't sure how easily we were going to be able to find the kills and how discreet or challenging they would be to find. And we were surprised at really how cryptic most of these kills actually are. But luckily, we did figure out how to find them. So this is a good example that just shows sort of how challenging these kills are to find, but also how you can find them. So here, Austin Homkes, who's a field biologist on a project, is taking a picture of where a wolf killed and consumed a deer fawn. You can see behind Austin, all of the vegetation is upright, it's undisturbed, there's nothing really that looks abnormal. But the spot that Austin is looking at has a bunch of leaves that are all sort of smashed down, like something's been laying there or something occurred there. And so we looked at this spot where we saw that some disturbance had occurred, and we got down literally on all fours and started sort of combing through the individual leaf litter, looking for evidence of a kill. And what we found in this spot was this, which is a fleck of bone, a little bit of tissue, and then the tip of a fawn hoof. And so this is pretty typical of what we're looking for during the summertime. And this is really why finding these kills has been so challenging. Here's a couple more examples of this. On the left, we have the remains of a fawn where there's a little piece of bone and 2 fawn teeth. Then on the right-hand side is a tooth, a hoof, and a little chunk of bone. And this is pretty common for what we're finding. So you can imagine if you're just going through the woods, not really sure what you're looking for, this would be just really easy to miss. And this is why wolf predation during the summer has remained unknown. Finding where wolves kill beavers can be equally as challenging. Here's an instance where a wolf killed a beaver that was traveling through this little creek. It was actually a kit beaver, which is a young of the year. This little black oval is actually the kill site. And so the next photo I'm going to show is me looking straight down into that black sort of circle. And this is what I saw. You can kind of make out the outline of a depressed area where something was sort of laying down there. And then if we look real closely, in the grass were the two front teeth of this young beaver and its stomach contents that were below the teeth. And then there's a little tuft of fur on the vegetation to the left. And that's all that was left. So far on our project, we have searched 11,800 clusters of these GPS locations. And we've done this from 28 wolves. We estimate this has probably taken about 15,000 hours of field work and 16 to 17,000 miles of hiking. And this is only data through last year. So this is including this year where we've searched another probably 4,000 clusters and put on another 4,000 or 5,000 miles. So this work is really field intensive. And that's because we literally go everywhere our collared wolves spend more than 20 minutes for a 7-month period of time. And so we have to cover, large expanses of wilderness to actually get to these areas. And so while this work's been really intensive, it's also really the only way to get this data. And it's really been fruitful for us because we've been able to find a lot. So to give you an example of what we found at these clusters of locations, we found 736 kills, 357 of these are deer fawns, 215 are beavers, 113 adult deer, a moose calf, and then 49 miscellaneous kills such as turtles and hares and raccoons, swans, ducks, you name it. If wolves can catch and kill it and eat it, they're going to. So I wanted to come back to this idea I sort of touched on earlier, which is, we wanted to understand the number of fawns and beavers a typical wolf kills during the summertime. So our preliminary work has shown that a typical wolf in the summer in the Greater Voyageurs Ecosystem kills between 13 and 15 deer fawns, but there's a wide range here. We have some wolves that have only killed 2 deer fawns and some that have killed 31 fawns, so there's a lot of variability. Similarly with beavers, a typical wolf is going to kill about 9 to 11 beavers during the summertime, but we've had some wolves that haven't killed a single beaver and some that have killed upwards of 28 beavers. And to put 28 beavers into perspective, a typical beaver lodge in the Voyageurs area has 5 beavers in it. So that means one wolf by itself killed the number of beavers in 5.5 beaver lodges, which is pretty nuts in my opinion. And then wolves do certainly kill adult deer on the shoulder months of the summer, so in early spring and late fall when the pack still is sort of traveling around together, or when the pups are big enough to start moving around with the pack. But it gets a lot more challenging to estimate this on a per wolf basis because wolves are actually making these kills with other wolves, not alone. So one of the big questions that we really want to answer is what drives the variability that we see in the data we've collected. That is, why are some wolves not killing any beavers and some killing 28 beavers? And there's a few different sort of hypotheses or ideas we have that we're really trying to look into. One of them is that the differences we're seeing is just a result of the amount of prey in a wolf's territory. So if you're a wolf in a territory with a lot of beavers, you're going to kill a lot of beavers because there's just a lot of them there, and vice versa. If there's no beavers in your territory or very few, you're not going to kill that many. So that is one, I'd say, very plausible explanation. Another could be pack specialization. That is that there are certain packs whose members have figured out how to hunt certain prey preferentially. So certain packs that have learned to specialize on beaver or deer fawns or something like that. There is evidence from Western North America that wolves will preferentially prey on certain species of deer out there. And so that might be plausible that there are certain packs that have figured out how to hunt certain prey. But maybe it's not that. Maybe it all comes down to individual ability. That is that some wolves are just better at hunting and killing prey than other wolves are, in the same way that some people are naturally more athletic than other people are. Wolves are mainly hunting by themselves, so it certainly seems that a lot of their ability to be successful is likely dependent on on sort of their own individual self to find and secure enough food. But perhaps it's not any of these explanations, and maybe it all comes down to the energetic demand of wolf pups. So if you're a wolf in a pack with a lot of pups, perhaps there's a larger energetic demand or burden placed on you to not only find food for yourself, but also to provision the pups. So we don't really have a great answer to this right now. It's going to take us several years to actually answer this question, because there's a lot of variables and ecosystems are really complex. And we want to make sure that before we attempt to answer this question, that we have a sufficient amount of data that we can really address this adequately. So now I'm going to sort of switch a little bit and sort of talk about some of the other cool findings we've had on our work through doing all of this sort of field work that we've done. The first thing that I'm going to talk about are this wolf pack that we found just south of Voyageurs National Park that had learned how to hunt spawning suckers in the spring. So this was the first wolf pack that's ever been documented hunting freshwater fish. Biologists had known for a long time that wolves in coastal environments of British Columbia and Alaska knew how to hunt and kill spawning salmon there. But there's I think, a radical difference between a large spawning salmon run in sort of coastal areas and spawning suckers going up small little creeks in northern Minnesota. So we knew that wolves knew that this pack was going after spawning suckers, but we really wanted to sort of see it ourselves. So in 2018, we put out a remote video camera, and where the wolves that looked like they were spending a lot of time fishing, and we were able to get the first and only video footage of wolves hunting freshwater fish that exists, and this is it. So you can see in this next one, you can actually see the fish swimming in the water as there's this slow-mo, and then the wolf comes in and grabs it. So we were obviously very excited not only to document that this behavior was occurring, but then also to be able to see it on remote cameras or on remote camera footage, because these are the aspects of wolf ecology that most people really never get a chance to see, in particular in Minnesota, where you would never be able to really observe this in person outside of using remote cameras. So another thing that we've learned on our project is that wolf diets are very flexible, and what we mean by that are wolves are really good at finding unique food sources and taking advantage of them. They're very adaptable, and they're just very good at finding food. And one of the unique food sources that they take advantage of in our area are blueberries. So pretty much every wolf from every pack that we've studied has, in the middle of the summer, spent time feeding on blueberries. And some packs do this more than others. We've had some packs in which berries can make up to 80% of the weekly diet of wolves, of that pack, I should state, in July when berries are abundant. So they will spend substantial time consuming berries, and we start finding all sorts of scats that look like this, with ground up berries and whole berries and leaves and different things like that. So we've known since 2015, when we started doing this intensive work, that wolves were foraging quite extensively on berries. And we tried for several years to try to get video footage of wolves doing this, because we thought that would be really unique, and to be able to observe that sounded really interesting. We had failed for several years, and then last year we put up a bunch more cameras and we got lucky. And so what I'm going to show is the first footage and the only known footage that we're aware of wolves actually eating blueberries. And so this is one of our collared wolves from last year, foraging on blueberries last July. And really, it's not quite as exciting as watching a wolf catching a fish, but it's still pretty cool to think about wolves just spending a bunch of time running around these berry patches, just grabbing bushes and, you know, trying to eat as many berries as they possibly can. And we have actually a lot more footage of this on a video we made for our Facebook page. So if you're interested in seeing more, I suggest watching or checking that out and watching it. So in my opinion, the most interesting finding that we figured out is how wolves hunt beavers. This is my personal interest. So when we started our work in 2015, this great book had literally just come out called Wolves on the Hunt, The Behavior of Wolves Hunting Wild Prey. And this is by Dave Meach, who's a world-renowned wolf biologist who's out of the Twin Cities, and then Doug Smith and Dan McNulty. And in this book, the authors sort of did a comprehensive review of what is known about wolf predation and how wolves hunt different prey species. The book was a couple hundred pages long, and the section on beavers was 3 paragraphs in which they concluded that there were no actual descriptions of wolves hunting beavers. So a lot of people had ideas of how wolves might actually go about this, but no one had any data to actually support that. And so by following our GPS collared wolves, we started to determine and quickly realized that wolves are primarily going after beavers by ambushing them. That is, our collared wolves would bed down next to areas that beavers were using a lot, such as beaver dams or trails where they were cutting vegetation, and the wolves would just bed down there for 4, 5, 8, 12 hours at a time, just waiting for beavers. And so we kind of put 2 and 2 together and figured out this was going on. Now that might not seem like much of a breakthrough, because you might be like, well, how else is a wolf going to catch a beaver? The important thing to note is that up until our work, wolves were not thought of as ambush predators. They were thought of almost entirely as cursorial predators, which means they primarily hunt and kill their prey by outrunning and outlasting their prey. They're not animals that are using a lot of tactic and secrecy and strategy to catch their prey. They're just literally outrunning and outlasting their prey. So the fact that we've been able to demonstrate that wolves actually ambush beavers has really sort of opened our sort of perspective on what wolves are like as predators, or at least what they're capable of. And it really shows, again, their flexibility, because very few large predators have the ability to go back and forth between 2 different hunting styles. Typically, a large predator has sort of one way of going about catching their prey. So if you're a cougar, you primarily stalk your prey, for example. You don't kind of go back and forth between different types. But wolves are different in that sense. To give you an idea of what this looks like in the field in terms of these ambushing attempts, I want to show this video I filmed last fall, which I think is a good example of this.
So it's September 15, 2019, and I'm at a spot where one of our collared wolves, beaver-ambushing, is attempting to ambush beavers. This is just a really great example of what wolves do and how they try to actually catch beavers. So right here behind me, you can see this aspen tree that the beavers have been working on. I'm at the end of a 31-year-long feeding trail. And wolf B079 bedded down right here. So only about 1.5 meters from where I was at the time to catch beavers. And this is generally what wolves are doing. They're bedding down and they're waiting for a substantial period of time for a beaver to waddle down this trail, work on this tree, and that's when the wolf can ambush. The B079 is at this particular bed for over 4 hours waiting for beavers. What I'm going to do is actually turn the camera around and show what the beaver would see if it's coming up the trail and 79 was bedded here. So give me a quick second here. So I'm going to put my backpack in the bed, and I should note the way we know this is a bed where B079 bedded down is because there's wolf hair all throughout the bed. So you can see little white hairs there. It's on the base of that tree as well. I'm going to put my backpack here. So that's where 79 would have been bedded down. And you can see it would have been right next to that tree. The trail that the beavers were coming up through goes right through there. And it actually comes out of a little river there. So if I was a beaver, I'd be coming up the trail like this. And I'd be slowly coming up, and hidden behind that balsam tree would be the wolf. I'd be following the trail, and that's where 7-9 would be waiting. And if the interaction occurred, the beaver would likely be dead because it's so far from the water. So just a really cool example of this. And what we've learned about how wolves ambush beavers comes largely through documenting these spots where wolves are spending time waiting to ambush beavers.
So what we've done on our project is identified these areas where wolves are ambushing beavers, and we've now identified over 1,000 of these instances where wolves have bedded down to ambush beavers. And we take a variety of different measurements, and our hope is to really get a good understanding of why wolves are choosing to wait and hunt beavers in certain locations. And we're hoping this really provides a lot of information and insight into wolves, and not only wolves, but then also beavers, because beavers are trying to live life without having fatal encounters with wolves. And so presumably their behavior has adapted to the threat of wolves waiting in ambush. Then the last sort of cool finding is, and this is not new, is that wolves are territorial. Everyone's known this for a long time, but I think what we've been able to do with our GPS collar data is display this in a really unique way. So this is GPS collar data from 7 wolves from 2018. And we put this map online, and immediately once we put it online, the map sort of went viral. And I think it's just because it illustrates this concept of territories and territoriality so clearly, and that wolves do in fact have distinct territories, and they maintain those. And it's not good for another wolf to go into another pack's territory, or at least it's dangerous. So now I'm going to spend probably the last sort of 5 minutes talking about what I think the value of the Voyageurs Wolf Project is, and not just myself, but all of us on the project. And while there's clearly scientific value to the work that we're doing, we also think there's a lot of outreach value as well. So in 2018, we really made a concerted effort to do a lot more outreach, because there seems to always be a barrier between biologists and scientists and the general public, and we sort of wanted to break down that barrier. So to do this, we created a Facebook page. And since we created that Facebook page in November of 2018, our Facebook content has reached more than 29.4 million people, and is currently reaching about 93,000 people a day, with almost 65,000 people following the project on Facebook alone. And so this was really sort of amazing to us, sort of the response, but it was really also great confirmation that people were really interested in this sort of information. And to give you an idea of where people are following the Facebook page from, this is data from Facebook, and we can see that we have followers all over the globe, which is one of the great things about the internet and sort of being connected that way. So a few things sort of really crystallized for us after we saw the way our sort of Facebook outreach had gone. The first is that people are very interested in wildlife, and I would say specifically in wolves, which are very charismatic animals. And people are also really interested in learning about what's going on in places like the Greater Voyageurs Ecosystem, which are these sort of wilderness areas that oftentimes can seem sort of inaccessible, or where it's very challenging to understand what's actually going on in the woods when we're not there. Luckily, through our work, we are able to share a lot of aspects about wolves and other wildlife that people cannot get any other way. So for example, the public cannot start catching wolves and putting GPS collars on them and seeing where they go travel about. But we can do that, and we can share that information with people. Additionally, most people in the public don't have the time or resources to deploy over 100 remote cameras across a 1,000 square mile area and to maintain those and things like that. But we have that ability, and we also have the ability to then to share that footage and what we see with a bunch of other people. And in doing so, give the public a sort of inside view into what's actually going on in these great wild places. And because our social media sort of campaign has been so successful, this has attracted a lot of interest from different national news outlets such as National Geographic, the New York Times, Vice, and NPR. So in many ways, this has been a great way for disseminating our research and sharing not only the wolves of the area, but also the area itself in northern Minnesota. So our goal on the Voyageurs Wolf Project, given what we believe to be the scientific value and the outreach value, is to keep the project going indefinitely and to really establish the Voyageurs Wolf Project as a long-term iconic wolf research project in the Northwoods. And some might ask, well, why is long-term wolf research, valuable? What is the point? From a scientific aspect, it's clear that long-term wolf research is invaluable. And to make that clear, we only have to look at two places, Yellowstone National Park and Isle Royale National Park, where there have been long-term iconic wolf studies that generate a ton of interest, not only in the wolves themselves, but also in the park as well. And these iconic long-term projects are really good at generating this public interest. Many of you might have seen the recent news out of Isle Royale National Park and on their wolf reintroduction the past few days. But this is the sort of value of this kind of research. One other interesting thing to note is that Voyageurs National Park is the only national park that never lost or the only national park in the lower 48 states that never lost their wolf population. So wolves were never extirpated from the area. And yet, ironically, it's really the only national park in the lower 48 states that doesn't have a permanent wolf research project ongoing. And so our hope through the Voyageurs Wolf Project is to change that. And we think having an iconic project could really do the same for Voyageurs in terms of outreach and generating excitement about the area. And with that, again, I need to thank all of the different technicians who have worked on our project and help us do all the different aspects of our research. I also need to acknowledge a variety of funding sources, including the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, Voyageurs National Park, University of Minnesota, the Van Soon Foundation, Bell Museum, and many other organizations. And so with that, I'll take questions, and I do want to quickly note that if you're interested in learning more or following the project, check us out on Facebook. We also have an Instagram account as well, and then we have a website below where you can learn more information and about the project and the work that we do. So with that, I'll take any questions if people have them.
Okay.